Today at Petrochemical Strategies, take me to your leader. Today I'll be talking about leadership in the chemicals industry with Dave Hovde, President and Principal Consultant at Hovde. It's the 21st day of September in the year 2020. Before we get started, grab a pen and a piece of paper. I want to ask you a question. How many chemical companies do you think there are in the United States? 1,000? 2,000? 5,000? Before we get to that, let me tell you a little bit about the industry. According to the 2019 Guide to the Business of Chemistry, published by the American Chemistry Council, the U.S. chemical industry is worth about $550 billion annually. The industry employs over 500,000 skilled workers, and it accounts for 10% of all U.S. goods exported. The chemical industry is basically broken into two different segments. The first segment includes the commodity chemical producers. They take huge amounts of feedstocks and convert them into building blocks for other products. They typically run 24/7 operations, and you probably recognize some of the names like ConocoPhillips or Air Products or Westlake. The second group are the specialty chemical producers. They operate a little bit different because they're producing specialty chemicals or performance chemicals that go into things like fertilizers or food or other household products. You might recognize some of the names like Ashland or Lubrizol, but there are a lot of companies that I bet you don't recognize their names, such as Astro Chemical out of New Jersey. They manufacture specialties for coatings, adhesives, encapsulation, and composites. And you shouldn't confuse them with Astro Emulsions, a South Carolina-based company. They produce specialties and pigment dispersions. Or Astro Pharma, an Austrian company specializing in innovative and niche pharmaceuticals. And of course, you wouldn't want to confuse them with the Houston Astros, who are neither a commodity nor specialty-based company, but sit in the heart of the U.S. chemical industry. Let's get back to my question and see if you got it right. According to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, there are over 9,000 companies manufacturing chemicals at over 13,500 sites in the U.S. This does not include warehouses or retail like where you buy your pool chemicals or paint stores, places like that. This means that the vast majority of these companies only have one production facility in the U.S. The other statistic I found extremely interesting is those companies in the especially chemical segment, 89% of them report that they employ less than 500 people. This is a very fragmented industry. This got me thinking, what is it like to be a leader at one of these small companies? You certainly don't have the resources like a big multinational corporation would have, but you don't have the politics and the bureaucracy either. This is exactly why I reached out to Dave Hovde, President and Principal Consultant at Hovde. Dave started his career at large and mid-sized companies, including Huntsman and TPC Group. He then ventured out to become the Executive Vice President at Southern Chemical. After that, he became the President at K-Solve and Garner Environmental Services. Almost exactly 2 years ago, Dave founded Hovde Incorporated to provide consulting services to small and mid-sized companies looking for expertise in business management, marketing, technical, and executive leadership. And here's my conversation with Dave. Hello, Dave. It's good to see you, if it's only on a screen and not in person. You've had a pretty interesting career spanning several companies and several different roles throughout your career. Before we get into the topic of leadership today, I'd like to ask you to tell me a little bit about your company, Hovde. What do you do and who do you serve?
Great. Thank you, Robert. One of my favorite subjects is talking about Hovde, so this should be natural for me. After a 35-year career in the chemical industry, I started a small consulting company named Hovde. The goal and the plan is for Hovde to service small to medium-sized companies that are involved in chemicals, chemical distribution, and environmental services. I currently have 3 to 4 clients that I work with, and to be honest, most of the time I work on building block type issues, things like banking, things like market development, transportation, logistics, sourcing, those types of things to help them get their leg up as far as competing in the industry. I also work with several of them on strategy development, in that they're really trying to grow their business and they're trying to find their niche, and sometimes those niches just aren't that apparent. So That's really where I'm focused, small to mid-sized companies that need some assistance, and I'm happy to offer some of my experience.
You were the top dog, or at least part of the leadership team as a president or executive vice president at several companies throughout your career. Most notably, you're EVP at Southern Chemical. So how has being an executive leader at a smaller chemical company differ from being a senior manager or a senior executive at a larger company like Huntsman or TPC Group?
Well, I think the biggest factor for me was really when I walked into some of these smaller companies with much more responsibility. And what happens to you is you accept the overall responsibility for the company right out of the box. You know, when you're working for a larger company, you have your areas of responsibility, but in these situations, it's everything. It's everything from the people and the assets and the laws that govern the assets, et cetera. So huge accountability, huge responsibility, even though they're smaller companies. I found that this was really important for the executive to assume those responsibilities, because it takes away the confusion as to who's accountable, and that's a day-to-day thing.
Well, that leads very well into my next question. The idea of what's thought to be a leader has changed somewhat over time. So, in your opinion, what role do executive leaders play today that's different than earlier in your career?
Well, there's no doubt that I've seen a difference, but I've been around for a long time. And what comes out of that is, I really believe what's happened is, you know, the old school executives and the new school executives really are different, but the new school executives have evolved, and they've evolved very quickly, and they've evolved due to a great deal of change. If you look around, the change that's occurred in the chemical industry is unbelievable. Technology changes, environmental concerns, legal constraints, product changes, all these types of changes have caused the management to evolve. Doesn't mean that the older generation was worse or the newer generation was good. It really just matters that they evolved, and how this evolution has also created a need for a bigger toolbox for the executives, and that bigger toolbox really comes in the way of different experiences. They come with M&A experience, they come with banking experience, they come with industry experience. Lots of tools to pull from to address the issues.
So, Dave, let's talk about that toolbox for a second. So, we are in a very different current situation than most people have ever experienced, or anybody probably has ever experienced. So, how has COVID-19 affected leaders in the chemical industry today, and what in their toolbox do they need today to get through this pandemic?
Hmm. Well, I think each situation will be different, but I also want to stress that this is not the first crisis that our industry leaders have been through. This might be the first time they've ever addressed a pandemic, which in itself is hugely different, but this isn't the first rodeo these folks have been through. Secondly, I think you should think about what the CEO really has to do within the company, and this different type of influence with the COVID is going to affect those things that they do. Three general things that when I think about a CEO's job is, they're supposed to fulfill the organizational goals of the company. They're supposed to adjust and make future strategic plans. And then they also have a general decision-making authority, so that people make the right decisions, and their decisions in line with the corporate guidelines of the company. So that's really, to me right now, in this crisis, that's their job, is to adjust strategy, to find different ways to fulfill their corporate goals, et cetera. So we'll see how they each do, right? I mean, but you have to really get down to what they're supposed to do, and how the COVID affects their outcome.
So in the past couple of years, the chemical industry has had several very unfortunate accidents, and safety to me is extremely important. And one of these incidents happened at one of your previous employers and made national news. So during your several stints as the head of a company or a senior leader at these smaller companies, I'm sure you had to be prepared for an event that happened at many of these other chemical companies. So what advice would you give to a newly brought in president or CEO of a small chemical company to deal with these types of crises?
Well, first of all, advice is a tough thing, right? The I really wouldn't want to give advice to somebody in that I haven't experienced a true catastrophic event. So it's, because they're all different, and basically the person in that job has different thoughts about how to address the crisis as it is. I would say this, that in my career, and it has been a while, I've worked for a number of companies that have had catastrophic issues, hurricanes, explosions, uh, deaths of employees. They're just horrific, and there's a lot of things that run around, trying to solve the issues that are involved with these catastrophic things that occur. I would tell you that there was a common thread of what I saw with the leaders of these companies that experienced this, and probably the biggest common thread is that they all of them took charge of the situation. They basically formed their teams up, got advice from their senior leadership team members, talked to the employees. But at the end of the day, they took leadership, they took ownership of the problem, and additionally, they became the main communicator, both internally and externally, on their progress with uh, you know solving the issues involved with the crisis. So it's a natural fit for the leader to take this role, but I also believe that it brings the corporate responsibility to the forefront, which is really important.
Well, Dave, that's very interesting. I'd like to end on a little bit more positive note. As as a company leader, what did you learn on the job that you could have never thought you would have needed to learn or would have learned at business school doing your MBA?
Yeah, I've thought about this one a little bit, and the truth is, the way I would put it was I never really realized how important developing relationships, personal and corporate relationships, would be when I was in business school. I was very fortunate to go to business school at TCU, and it was a very structured program there. I was basically I was on the 5-year night school plan, and worked in a laboratory during the day, went to school at night, and went to take my classes during school. And it was a very good experience for me because I learned, instead of technical chemical type things, I learned about business, and that was great. But very little on on relationship building. And so after graduating, I went into the sales side of the company I worked for, started developing my relationships, kind of learned to play golf. The people that know me say I'm not a very good golfer, but learned to play golf, liked to fish, got into the industry events, and formed these relationships. And to be honest, I can't today think of any significant deal that I've ever made or where there wasn't a relationship involved. And it's so important to people in business to have those relationships, but also have the basic fundamentals that you do learn in business school.
Well, Dave, thank you very much for sharing your insights today. I think anyone who is either just taking on an executive leadership role or somebody who's been in that role for a long time will have learned a little bit from your insights today. Thank you so much. I wish you and your company all the best in the future.
Thank you, Robert. See you soon.
What did we learn? Well, we learned that the industry is highly, highly fragmented, and even the smallest chemical companies need leaders who are accountable and responsible. It's really the nature of the industry. Secondly, we learned the importance of developing your leadership toolbox throughout your career. Not only does it help you in running the business, but it helps you in times of crisis, like what we're facing today with COVID-19. And lastly, education and intelligence are only part of the equation. Building relationships is an extremely important part of maneuvering around this highly fragmented industry. Thanks for watching today at Petrochemical Strategies. A full transcript of this episode plus references can be found on my website, petrochemicalstrategies.com. If you have any comments, you can leave me a comment there as well. I will see you next time.